Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. And in this programme we shall be discussing Donald Trump's historic victory in the US presidential elections last week and asking what would this mean for Christian freedoms both in America and here in the UK. And in this programme today I'm joined by Eric Casto from Global Reach Ministries in the States. It's great to have you back on the programme, Eric.
Great to be here.
And of course, very familiar to our viewers, my good friend Alistair Scott. So welcome to the programme. And Eric, it's great to see you back on the programme. I think you were back on the programme when you were last here in May. So it's great that we can have a US perspective on the US presidential election. But it must be a bit gutting for you as well, being in the UK as the election results were being announced and not being back home to celebrate Trump's incredible historic victory. But can you also give us an update on the ministry that is Global Reach and what you're involved in?
Yeah, you know, Global Reach is a ministry of taking the Word of God. It's evangelistic into the streets of Europe and into other nations that we go into. I just got back from Japan, where I carry a cross and train up teams of evangelists, and we go out and we love people. We plant the Word of God. We have a little smile leaflet. It's a 4 reasons why you can smile. It's a gospel tract, and as we go out, people take it, people read it. It opens the door for praying for people. So that's what we do for the last 24 years in England, in London, you know, especially in London. So that's what we do, and Alistair's a big part of that.
Yep.
And
it's good to see you back on the programme as well. So it gives me an opportunity to help promote the new programme that you're doing, which is the Persecuted Church, which is now weekly on a Tuesday night. But give us your reaction, Alistair, to probably the greatest political comeback in US history and this historic victory of Donald Trump and the Republicans, not only winning the White House, but also both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives.
It's an amazing turnaround, isn't it? Because if you were listening to any news broadcasts on the terrestrial television, you'd be thinking it's going to be a close run race. But it was incredible. What a comeback for a man who was out of the office, but not out of the eyesight, let's say, over the last 4 years. He was definitely in the front line, preparing for this day, and I think it's miraculous, but not surprising, because I know in America, in the USA, there were intercessors praying constantly for months, not just a few weeks before the elections. This country too, people who have an understanding how important it is for USA to have a strong president were praying strongly that the right God's man would take that place, and God's chosen his president for the times that we live in. You know, talk about an Esther or a Mordecai for a time such as this. President Trump is in position at a time in history where the nations are really crumbling, shaking, and we need strong government. We need strong leadership in every area.
And Eric, as the election results were coming in on Wednesday night of last week, I kept waking up, I kept putting the news on, find out what the actual results were. And literally last Wednesday felt like a lot of darkness was broken. And for the first time in a long time, there was almost like a ray of light going through into the nations as you felt that oppression, that evil lift. Just share with us, as an American Christian, the significance of not only Donald Trump's historic victory in winning the presidency and becoming America's 47th president, but he also won the popular vote, which means there can be no question of his legitimacy that he won from his opponents, the Democrats. Then to have both houses of Congress, which gives him unprecedented legislative power to set forth his political program for the next 4 years. But also the fact that he can also pack the Supreme Court with conservative justices, which then can transform American society. As a Christian, just share with us the significance of Donald Trump's victory and what this means for you and for so many Bible-believing Americans.
Well, I think it's huge because, you know, a lot of the perspective that, you know, I kind of face when I go into Europe or other nations, and I think it's a little bit skewed. They kind of want to know, is the American church become political? And I think a lot of people don't understand that an American is one that loves freedom. And also there's a deep root of Christianity. So Christians look at a nation wanting it to be holy, wanting it to have a Judeo-Christian background in it, which then ties it to Israel as well. being pro-Israel, pro-Jerusalem, because of the Bible foundation. And so a lot of prayer was going up for this election. And so we found a man that has yielded himself to the hand of God to protect Christians, to protect all Americans, actually. I mean, when you really look at it, he's for every American. There's no divisiveness in him. And but for the church especially, you're talking about a lot of the issues that the Bible deals with, and is very clear, he's standing with, and he's moving that direction and kind of stopping this downhill slide into an anti-Judeo-Christian movement. And Simon, when you said that kind of that veil of darkness that had been over America for at least 4 years.
And the world, I would say.
See? Yeah, you're right. I mean, because when I heard that Trump won, you can begin to feel the crack, all the darkness that's been on the nation beginning to shift, and a joy beginning to come. And then you watch the market surging, and all of a sudden the nations around the world are shifting, going, you know, uh-oh, something new has come. And so it's big for Christians, whether they know it or not. Even Christians in this nation, I'm going to prophesy, start to get happy again, because something good has happened. And I just believe, and I've said it the last time I was on, there's a tie between this nation and Great Britain that needs to be churned up again. And it's world changing when it does.
Well, the Lord has only used really 3 nations very powerfully in world history: the nation of Israel, Great Britain, and the United States, and of course the other Anglo-Saxon nations as well, such as Australia, New Zealand, and to a certain extent South Africa before. But this is really that force to be reckoned with on the world stage to become the world's protector. And of course he's used our nations powerfully, both in the First World War to stop German imperialism, to stop Nazi Germany and Hitler in his tracks together with Imperial Japan, and then during the Cold War as well by stopping the Soviets from invading Europe, and used our 2 nations very powerfully over the last century as well. So, and of course the democratic freedoms and Christian freedoms that America's had since its foundation have been extraordinary, which have come under attack in recent decades, which leads me on, Alistair, to discuss Kamala Harris. I mean, the American people and the world face the prospect of a Kamala Harris becoming president with ultra-progressive liberal views, and where she actually dared to put the issue of abortion at the forefront of her political campaign. Really makes you think that what a contrast between the Republicans and the Democrats. Share with us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that was such an obvious stand that Kamala Harris was taking. She was pro-abortion, obviously, and pro-feminism, you know, and so. But when you ask people who are following the politics, what has she achieved? You know, people have to think, and then they think, I don't know. And the only thing she ever talked about was the abortion issue, because she thought that was going to bring the women vote towards her. And it didn't. It really blew up in her face. And I think people saw through the facade, the outer veneer, and realized there was nothing. There was no substance in her at all. And I guess she'll just move away out of politics, out of the elections strata, and be replaced by somebody aiming to make a go at 4 years' time. But yes, she had very little to offer. She was a laughingstock in many ways. Even, you know, she was in some ways, which is not right, belittled because of the way she laughed and so on. But the only thing she ever talked about was abortion.
If you could make sense of her sentences and her speeches, which was a big challenge.
Well, she had a good teacher, didn't she?
Absolutely. And Eric, I mean, I think we have to look at the election victory of Donald Trump and compare this to a David Goliath moment, which is not portrayed by our mainstream media here, that I didn't know until recently, but the Democrats were the party of the elites. Not only did they have the backing of the big tech companies, which we knew they had the backing of of the universities. They also have the backing of Wall Street, but also they had the backing of the entertainment industry as well. But also Kamala Harris' campaign almost amounted to $1 billion US, 3 times as much money to spend on this election than the Republicans. So really share with us how, for example, this really was a conflict between David and Goliath.
Well, yeah, the American people obviously made the election happen. So you can throw a lot of money into an election, but at the end of the day, if it's a fair election, the people win. And I think in this one, with all of the money that was being thrown into the Democrat, pockets, people were still going to the store and paying out a whole lot of money that they didn't have for groceries. And, that was huge. I don't know if the media really focuses on it enough. The price of groceries have skyrocketed. And it doesn't matter if Oprah is going to be on, telling everybody to vote for Kamala. When you go and buy your milk and your bread and you're paying $20 for 2 items, you're not thinking about Oprah anymore. You're thinking about how am I going to make it? And actually, when Trump was president, things were good. But I think the other thing is this, and when you look at the numbers of the votes over the last 4 elections, Trump won. When you look at how many votes went into the last election, 2020, there's we talked about it, 15 million votes that went somewhere. We don't know where they're at. And so until you find out what really happened, I really believe the American people have showed up for the elections the last couple times, and in my view, I believe that Trump has won 3 elections, So I think we're going to find out what actually happened in the couple years to come. But yeah, it is David and Goliath from that aspect. There's a lot of money being thrown against him, and he won.
Yeah, and Alistair, I just want to quote something from the Times this week, where they said that the headline in the Times article on Tuesday was the evangelicals rejoice at the victory for the chosen one. And they quote the Associated Press saying that 80% of white evangelical Christian voters voted, and that 20% which represents 20% of the total electorate who cast their vote for Trump. Just share with us essentially how evangelicals helped to put Donald Trump back in the White House.
It makes all the difference, doesn't it? I know in one of the programs last week, or one of the prayer meetings, we were hearing the fact that a lot of Christians in USA don't like to vote because they think they should.
31 million.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of people, and we were really praying that God places us to make a difference in our society. So we are meant to be involved in every strata. You don't have to be a politician to affect politics. You need to be an intercessor to affect politics. And I mean, that's the big difference. Is the evangelicals were a people of prayer. They were intercessors. I said this earlier, not only in this country, but in USA particularly, and in Israel. Israel were really praying with all their might for a victory for Trump, because they could see the Biden administration were coming more and more against Israel, and likely if they got another term, it would be a very difficult time for Israel. So prayers make a difference. Evangelical Christians made a difference because they took it seriously, and they realized, if my people are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, God hears. God answers, and he answered big time in the USA election. I think in some ways it was almost like people were beginning to watch the polls and be affected by it, and maybe that was a spur even more for the Christians to pray louder and longer, because it was a whitewash of a victory.
And clearly the enemies of Israel and the enemies of the West are. We only have to look at Qatar telling, for example, the Hamas leaders who are worth £4 billion each to leave the country. Yeah. And that's a direct result of Trump coming to power. And no doubt the Iranians regime and leaders are quaking in their boots as well. I don't think there's going to be any retaliatory strikes on Israel anytime soon, which is great. So you already feel that the world is a safer place. But Eric, I think to communicate to our Christian viewers here in the UK who don't understand America, they don't understand American Christianity, having worked in the States, you understand that politics is a huge part of a Christian's faith. And the fact is that Christian churchgoers will also attend, say, Republican meetings, coffee meetings on a Saturday morning for a local candidate. And politics is integrated within the church because there is an understanding that the church is the moral conscience of the nation. And that's the role of the church. And therefore, to actually affect righteousness in the country, then you need to be engaged in the political process. And this is why something in this country, ever since the end of the Second World War, we've neglected to do this as evangelical Christians, and of course we've given that political territory to the enemy, and of course we have the most unrighteous legislation really going on from the late 1960s onwards that has really brought the curse of God upon our land and our nation. And we wonder why we have such ungodly leaders in power making such ungodly legislation, because we haven't stood up to it, because we haven't engaged in that political process enough. But share with us the importance of engaging in politics, particularly as so many Christians have done in the presidential elections. And now we see, for example, that we see Mike Huckabee now as such a strong Christian senator for Arkansas, and had his own TV program on TBN, and now he's America's ambassador to Israel, and others who are able to play a prominent role in determining the direction the United States goes, pretty much in a godly direction.
You know, I think it all begins with how British came to America. They had their Bibles, and then they had great awakenings, and they began to realize that there has to be a contract. And that contract for government has to include God, not a church that oversees it, but the Word of God, biblical principles that hold men to a moral value, a moral code. And of course, our founding fathers, tremendous Englishmen. And that's what, you know, when you're watching maybe from this nation, they were English, they were Brits. And they were hugely smart. They loved God. They had Bibles. The Bibles were being printed. They were reading it. They were having awakenings. And they realized you can't give people too much power. So everything that was written to try to control power. And so when someone runs for office, they're your neighbor. They're not better than you. But for some reason, when they get into government, it's like they become gods because they represent this entity. And the entity's right, so submit to it. But that's not how Americans think. Americans think, no, we're just men. And the Bible has to be first. And so American Christians, they don't go to the poll saying, well, I'm a Christian. No, we're Americans. And I'm going to use my Christianity to have a voice, to stand up. Not all of them do. But we still have that in our nation where my Christianity affects how I vote, how I speak. And the greatest liberty Americans have is freedom of speech. That's being attacked all over the world. In this nation, especially, which champion freedom of speech. We still have it. We're fighting for it. And Christians are not going to back down. If we coalesce, then the world can, call us all kinds of names, but it's our nation we're fighting for. And Trump at this point is the guy that's fighting for us, fighting with us actually. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I think that understanding is crucial. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Alistair, share with us the impact that a Trump presidency can have on Christians in the UK, here in Europe, who many believe that are kind of lost hope in the kind of political process, that we'd ever be able to turn back the abortion legislation, or ever be able to legislate for righteous legislation where Christians feel like they are being marginalised and they are being attacked because our government's obsession with pursuing ultra-liberal progressive ideas which come into direct conflict with kind of biblical values, and how we can learn from America's example that we can push that back now, knowing that this is what's happening in the States.
If ever there was a message of don't give up, I think Donald Trump carried that because, it could have been very, and I think a lot of our politicians in our country, from some of the comments they've made, they thought he was going to be giving up and that would be the end of his career. But you read that quote from the Times, the chosen one. Well, he is the chosen one of God. because, you know, the Bible's very clear, Romans 13, all people who are in authority are there because the Lord allows it. So it's kind of said as a kind of cynical, smart kind of comment. But the truth is he was chosen. And why was he chosen? Because God saw in him something that is not only going to be useful to USA, but is going to be useful to any nation. And for us as Christians, let's be encouraged by seeing what looked like an impossible result became a possible result, because nothing is impossible without God. So as long as we're people who are willing to pray and to stand up for the morals and the biblical truths. I mean, Eric's put that across so well, that the evangelical Christians in America, they believe the Bible. They don't debate about does this mean this or does it mean that. They stand on the Word of God. And I think for us as believers in this country, we should and always should stand up for these kind of attacks that come out of sides of politics to try and silence the Christian voice. We need to make sure the Christian voice is louder than ever before. And people of prayer stand up and continue to pray strong, that we see righteousness restored in our nation, because righteousness exalts the nation. We want to see that. Sin is an absolute travesty to any nation, and we want to see righteousness, we want to see godliness restored in our politicians, but in our lives too. Let the church, let God arise, and let him rise up the church to take its place as a voice to the nation, as a voice that affects the nation. We are called to bring godliness into our council for our government. So it starts with prayer, and I believe God will open doors for Christianity in its true form to rise up again in our land.
Well said. And Eric, how will Trump protect Christian freedoms? Because we know that he wants to push back on so many of these disastrous globalist policies, such as open borders, whereas it's a region of 13 million migrants, illegal migrants that have come into America. He wants to kick them out of the country because he sees this as an existential threat. Wanting to bring on Elon Musk, for example, is a clear indication, part of his cabinet, that he wants to uphold freedom of speech and liberty. But just share with us how you think a Trump administration will protect and advance Christian freedoms in the United States, which will eventually have an impact on our country and across the Western world.
Well, I think the most important thing is Trump can't save America.
Only Jesus.
Only God can.
Exactly.
And he wasn't elected to save America. He was elected to be the president. And his policies provide a canopy for the church, if the church will rise up in this time of freedom, where churches can get back to prayer, get back to evangelism, get back to the things that they should be doing. Churches are getting back out of the COVID. They're starting to function again. We've lost a lot of churches through COVID, but churches are starting to get back into the flow again. And Trump is a canopy where it says, you know, pray for the king so that when there's peace in the land, you'll prosper. And so we're moving in a direction of prosperity. I believe it's going to move fast. The team that he's working on, when you look at the people, I believe there's going to be something of the grace of God that's going to get moving. I prophesy again, British Christians, get happy. And Britain, get involved, because this economic engine is only going to bless the UK if you get moving with it. And so, and the other side with the border, a lot of people don't understand, is the amount of death on the border. So many people are dying because of the incentives. If you come here, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, we'll give you everything you want, and it's just a trail of death. People don't understand that. Trail of rape, trail of all these different things, meth, and terrorism as well. So we've got our work cut out for us as a nation, not just Trump, but as a nation. We all have to be involved in prayer, feet on the ground. And so it's pretty exciting to see how fast he's already running. And that's pretty much like Trump. He's going to run fast. He's going to put it together. And it's going to be built to do something. If he said he's going to do it, he always does it. And so that's pretty good. One thing, Simon, he said, we're going to restore prayer to schools. And I'm like, now that is a mountain, but I believe he'll do it. And they're already talking about defunding the Department of Education, just getting rid of it. which would probably be another great move, because technically it's just a Marxist operation. You know, it's another. You didn't mention that earlier when we were talking before this. The Department of Education is another one of those entities that's controlling schools. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. I love what I see so far, and I'm trying to say, is this real? You know, and it is real.
And very quickly, Alistair, also we see that Israel will determine whether the United States is blessed or whether it's cursed. Now, there can be no doubt that the United States has been cursed for the way it's treated Israel and the Jewish people, particularly after the aftermath of horrors of October the 7th. But the fact is that Mike Huckabee now, who's such a strong evangelical Christian, is now America's ambassador to Israel. He's against a two-state solution. He's against a Palestinian state. He supports the Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria. Surely that's sending a message to Israel of the importance that Israel's going to play in this new Trump administration.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a total turnaround from what was happening in the previous administration. They were trying to keep Israel controlled. And here we have a man who's, it's almost as momentous as moving the embassy into Jerusalem. And that was one of the early things that Trump did before. And that brought a blessing on the Trump era in the USA. And I'm certain as USA and the new presidency and the new ambassador to Israel get their feet in the door, we're going to see a lot of changes, a lot of standing with Israel, encouraging Israel to do the things that are right, not only for Israel, but it's right for the world. It's right for the USA. It's right for Europe, even though Europe don't necessarily accept that. And I can see for certain as Donald Trump carries out the things he's been talking about and standing with Israel, helping Israel along economically and every other way, the blessing. I will bless those who bless you. The blessing's coming back on the USA. We maybe should all move to USA for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and within 30 seconds, Eric, share with us how our Christian viewers need to be vigilant, particularly on this transition period from the Democrats to the Republicans. And we saw also that Obama allowed some of the horrific UN resolutions against Israel during this transition period from the last Trump administration.
Well, I think, you know, the Bible says watch and pray. I mean, that's really where Christ's words come to us. You have to watch, you have to pray, and you have to pray for these leaders. There's a lot coming we don't know. Obviously, we didn't see COVID coming. We didn't see the war in Israel coming. We're talking about a victory for Trump, but things we don't know what's coming, so we have to pray.
Absolutely.
And thank you.
Eric and Alistair, thank you so much for being my guests on Politics Day. Done a great job. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you for watching this program home. Yes, let's continue to pray for the United States, but we can rejoice that God has answered so many prayers with Donald Trump returning back to the White House. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.